So now we know what we need to know about dark money in politics. I'm really, really, really thrilled that we have the filmmaker here today. So I'm going to introduce her. Director Kimberly Reed's work has been featured on the Oprah Winfrey Show, CNN, NPR, The Moth, and in Details magazine. She was named one of Filmmaker magazine's 25 New Faces of Independent Film, and she directed and produced the astonishing documentary in 2008 called Prodigal Sons, which landed on many of the best of the year lists, screened at more than 100 film festivals, and garnered 14 audience and jury awards, including the Cannes Film Festival Critics' Prize. She also produced, edited, and wrote the feature documentary Paul Goodman Changed My Life, about the activist and public intellectual Paul Goodman. And she produced the Netflix documentary The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson, about the gay rights activist and Stonewall and ACT UP shero, Marsha P. Johnson. Our moderator tonight is Shaniqua McClendon, the political director for Crooked Media, home to the popular podcast Pod Save America. At Crooked Media, McClendon led the creation of their midterm voter engagement program, Vote Save America. She's a graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where she earned her master's in public policy. During her studies, she also worked at Facebook on their politics and government outreach team. Prior to that, she served in various capacities on Capitol Hill, starting off as an intern in the Obama administration, and then she was a staff assistant for Senator Kay Hagan, and went on to serve as legislative director for Congresswoman Alma S. Adams. McClendon did her undergraduate work in journalism and mass communications at UNC Chapel Hill. And please join me in welcoming Kim Reed and Shaniqua McClendon.
Hey everyone, thanks for staying.
Good evening. So first off, one more round of applause for Kimberly. So the documentary is really amazing. I really enjoyed it. I was telling Kimberly backstage that I yelled at my TV screen so many times, this is not okay, I don't know how this is happening. And I've worked in politics for 10 years. So it just goes to show kind of just how behind the scenes things like dark money can be. But I just wanted to start off with maybe letting the audience know what prompted you to even make this documentary.
I think injustice, just the feeling that people weren't following the rules. Like one side of these political campaigns was following the rules and the other wasn't. A seed got planted to make this film when I heard about Citizens United. Sounded like a terrible idea to just pour unlimited money into campaigns, and when the Citizens United came down, that's how people were really thinking about it. It was just unlimited money. It was all going to come from corporations. I didn't know what to do with that for a couple of years until 2012, when my home state of Montana had this law that was going to defend, had this case that was going to go to the Supreme Court and defend its own law and challenge Citizens United. So it was just kind of one of those light bulb moments of like, oh, this is how we could tackle this big, huge, gnarly, frankly, uncinematic issue of campaign finance by telling it through these people in this court case that was going to Washington, D.C. And so, yeah, I think that once I got into it a little bit more and I realized that not only could we tell this story, and not only was my home state where I knew I would have good access, probably the best case study that we could find to tell that story. But I also realized that it wasn't just the unlimited nature of the money that was the problem, and that's what everybody was talking about at the time. The anonymous nature of the money was even more problematic, and that's what was happening in Montana, which was kind of a testing ground for a lot of this 501c4 spending, sort of the canary in the coal mine for, you could see that this was going to spread to other states. So yeah, just ended up sticking with the film. It ended up taking 6 years between 2012 and 2016.
And as you went through this process, and I imagine you talked to voters, did you feel like they had a sense of the gravity of what the Citizens United decision meant for them and how they participate in electoral politics?
I don't want to make it this perfect political climate. There's some voters who are engaged and some that aren't. But by and large, I think people really did get it, like more than I've seen in other places. Some of the first ballot initiatives to defy Citizens United came from Montana. About 80% of the people voted for it. It passed in every county in Montana, rural counties and urban counties, insofar as you can be urban in Montana, which is kind of the wrong word. But yeah, I mean, people sort of did get it, and I understood why people got it, because having grown up there, and when you go to grade school and you hear about Copper Kings, and when you drive by the Berkeley Pit and you hear all these stories about snow geese dying, and you just kind of are surrounded. It's a really beautiful state, but then you see like one really horrible mistake that was caused by essentially the role of money in politics, and you see what the repercussions of those bad decisions are. It really gives you a very deep-seated skepticism about money in politics, and that's a skepticism that I had, and I think a lot of people there do too.
So one thing I noticed in the documentary is a lot of the candidates and elected officials that are profiled are Republicans, but there's a split between the Republicans who benefit from this dark money and the Republicans who the dark money is used against. Taking kind of a step back from dark money and thinking more broadly about campaign finance reform, do you ever think that there will be any politician from either party that would truly want this kind of reform, especially in light of Citizens United really being framed as like this Republican-Democrat debate, but both parties do benefit from the way things are right now?
Yeah, I mean, you see dark money being spent on the right and the left. Technically, those candidates are not supposed to be coordinating. I think sometimes they don't. I think a lot of times they are, and we just don't know it. And that happens on both sides. I think we also have to be fair and not create this false equivalency, because the tactic was developed and really weaponized on the right, and vastly more money has been spent on the right than on the left. But this election cycle, we're starting to see folks on the left start to match up and spend a lot more money. And the real trick to fix this problem is to convince elected officials who just got elected with this system to turn around and reform the system that got them elected, right? And we're talking about a situation where these folks, as soon as they get into office, have to start running for office again, especially if they're in the House with a 2-year seat. So this kind of constant campaigning makes it really, really difficult to convince people that this needs to be overturned. But happy to say that once again, a lot of the leaders in this role are coming from Montana. Yeah. Steve Bullock, who's governor, was the first governor to issue an executive order saying that any government contractors who did business with the state of Montana had to disclose their political giving. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of this disclosure thing, but coming from the other way, right? The person receiving the money doesn't have to disclose it. The person giving the money, if you're a government contractor, has to disclose it. It's a novel solution that I hope catches on in other states. John Tester is one of the sponsors of a version of the Disclose Act that you saw the state of Montana pass, but he's doing it at a federal level. Mm-hmm. So, yes, they're pushing for it. I think that's a really good thing. I think that if you get enough people, this is what happened in Montana, is enough people were paying attention to it. Dark money became part of the conversation. Mm-hmm. And if somebody was running for office and started to benefit from it, whether or not you could prove that there was direct coordination between the candidate and the dark money group, just the accusation that you're benefiting from dark money became something that voters really paid a lot of attention to. and immediately whoever was benefiting from dark money had to decry it and step away from it. And if you can get the voting public like well aware enough and paying attention to this issue, you can really kind of flip the script on that, so that everybody's stepping away from that use of dark money, and that's what we saw happen. Now, unfortunately, that's happening. Fortunately, at the state level, that's happening in Montana. It's happening in other states. California has relatively strong campaign finance laws, and that's a good thing. Still, lots to do. But at the federal level, for example, like right now, John Tester is running for Senate, and there's more. So far, there's $20 million worth of dark money spent against him. About 17 million spent against his opponent, and those numbers add up to way more money that was spent overall in his campaign last time around. In other words, more dark money than overall money was spent last time, and it just seems to catapult. And that's because that those federal elections are taking place according to federal laws, and they're regulated by the FEC, which is not enforcing anything.
So you just mentioned that there's fundraising going on the left, and we have a lot of grassroots donors. Beto O'Rourke, for instance, has raised a ton of money and is not taking any corporate money. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has vowed that she's not doing that either. And you have this group of candidates who are running now who are not taking money from corporate PACs. Do you think that if more of those types of folks are elected, that they can start to, form a coalition and actually have an impact in Congress? We'll just say Congress for now, in the U.S. Congress, and push some of their colleagues to start to come out on this issue and change it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a really encouraging development. The candidates are able to run based on, receiving a bunch of small donations from a bunch of donors instead of a handful of donations from billionaires that you meet at cocktail parties and fundraisers. And if you can, what shifting this whole campaign finance system is really about, I think, in the long run, is about incentivizing candidates themselves to pay attention to everyday voters instead of only talking to a couple billionaires who are going to write policy. One way to do that is the way that we do it in New York City, where I live now, which is if you have a pool of public financing that matches donations coming from individuals, that's a really effective way to incentivize candidates to pay attention to everyday citizens. So if I get $100 from you and you and you, and the city of New York's public financing fund matches that, in New York they do it 6-1, all of a sudden I'm getting $700 from each of you, and that's real money, and it incentivizes me to pay attention to you guys. That also has the benefit of you end up with more women running and winning. You end up with more people of color running and winning, and you just generally end up with elected officials who reflect their constituencies much more.
So kind of the larger thing that's always been interesting to me when we think about the role that money plays in politics and influencing our politicians is that we're supposed to all have one vote, and that vote is supposed to, go into the ballot box and carry some weight and influence the way that our elected officials carry out their jobs. Do you think there's a connection between voter suppression, low voter turnout, and the ability that this dark money is able to play in our elections?
Yeah, and it's related to this last question in a lot of ways, is that I think a lot of voters just get the sense that their vote doesn't matter, that these elected officials are only listening to the billionaires that they meet at the cocktail parties who are going to write policy on their behalf that's going to benefit them and nobody else. And that sort of putting power of democracy back into the hands of these egalitarian masses is the way to do it. And, small donor matching fund systems are have proven very effective in doing so. There's also really interesting, and I mean, we're here in California, and this campaign finance laws are pretty strong, but there's still a lot of work that can be done at the local level. Dark money is being spent at the local level. It's being spent, like in 2014, Americans for Prosperity spent money in 3 school board elections in Corpus Christi, Texas. So why? I mean, there's probably a oil refinery that's going to be built there or something. But yeah, it's being spent at the local level. So if it seems like small potatoes to get involved in reforming elections at the local level, it's not, because that's what you're in direct competition with. So there's about between 500, 700 cities across the states that have issued resolutions, proclamations, saying that we don't want our elections to be run according to the laws of Citizens United. We want to see that repealed. We don't believe that money is speech and corporations are people, and we want all of the money in our elections to be accountable. So for folks here, like, go back to your school boards and go back to your city councils and your county commissions and make sure that those elections have the disclosure that you need to know where the money is coming from, so you know what these influences are. And, you know, if we go school board after school board, state after state, one of the things that California can really do is give other states a really good example to follow.
And California does that a lot on a lot of issues.
Yeah.
So the question I just asked was more focused on voters holding their elected officials accountable. But I think we've seen lately with a lot of decisions that corporations are making with who they support, you know, who their spokespersons are. If their spokespeople do something that consumers don't like, they're making decisions to pull their support or not have these people be the face of their brands anymore. Do you think that voters as consumers can also play a role in pushing companies not to invest in these C4s, or is the connection between the company and the candidate too far off for them to care about what consumers might think?
I think in situations where you can tell where the money is coming from, absolutely, voter pressure on those corporations, on those organizations, even 501c4 organizations whose you know, you appreciate a lot of what they do. You can also make sure that they're not giving dark money to candidates. That's a big, you know, lever that voters have. What we saw happen initially when Citizens United was passed, there was kind of a big push right out of the gates that, you know, everybody was worried that, you know, Koch was going to have their, well, you have to be careful, COKE was going to have their super PAC that was going to be spending money, and Pepsi was going to have their super PAC that was going to be spending money. And those, now you guys get the Coke joke, right? A little bit, kind of buried the lead on that one. But that it wasn't, corporations, it turned out, were pretty sensitive to the public presentation that they had. But that's a big part of the reason why super PACs have become less of an issue, where those corporations have to disclose their role, and they've started to move more into dark money spending where they can really hide it. Mm-hmm. That is why what happened with Governor Bullock's executive order declaring that those giving money had to declare where they were giving that money, was also another way to get at this disclosure. Mm-hmm. That can be done at the federal level. That can be done in California. It's not happening now with government contractors with California. If the SEC, we got FECs and SECs. Yeah. If the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, would demand that all government contractors, you know, expose who they're giving money to, which candidates, there's a big flow of money going to, that would give us as voters much more information so that we could determine, whether there's corruption or the appearance of corruption.
Yeah. And so with PACs, I mean, companies can have PACs if they want to. Why do you think they are choosing this backdoor route where they get to invest in secrecy and not have people know what their actual interests are?
Because they just don't get busted. They don't get busted on it. The pharmaceutical company doesn't have to worry about, the big pipeline of money that's going to that particular senator, that particular congressperson. It just keeps their hands clean. There's an organization called Issue One. They took a really deep dive on all of this information that has been that we've been able to get our hands on since Citizens United passed in 2010, and they reverse engineered a lot of these IRS declarations, 990s, where you have to tell the government where you're spending your money. And they were able to discern by cross-referencing all of these different political donations where a good deal of that money is coming from. It's about $750 million. And they found that 3/4 of that only comes from 15 organizations. It's really only 15 organizations that are steering all of this. So even though we can't put our finger on this corporate or sometimes union money that's going through these 501c4 groups, you can be assured that there's only a couple people who are, aiming these fire hoses, and they have a lot of influence.
So I think it's clear that as long as the corporations are able to kind of get away with pouring money into these C4s and then those getting to the candidates, that there's no incentive for them to change. But, in the documentary, you profiled Wittick, who was found guilty of coordinating with this C4 organization. And the whole Colorado paper story was just completely crazy.
Crazy, right?
Yes. But could you talk about the impact that court decision had on other politicians in Montana, or if there were any national implications and changes in behavior?
Yeah, I think it really changed the political culture. It didn't, it wasn't completely night and day shut every last little bit of dark money down, but it really shifted the way that the public paid attention to it. I mean, this was a big trial. It was on a front page above the fold on every newspaper across the state for weeks. And it actually wasn't just Art Wittick who was found to have violated campaign finance laws. National Right to Work rolled into Montana, and they ran 14 different elections in that one election cycle in 2010. Actually, Gene Gerussi, the guy who came out of retirement, he came out of retirement again and again and again, and he prosecuted 9 different cases. So this is not small potatoes. They were running a whole raft of candidates, and they had a lot of influence on other candidates who were in office who they didn't install directly. They still maintained a lot of influence. So it did bring a lot of even more skepticism of money in politics that I was talking about. And I think that it's a good example to follow because, Montana doesn't have, there's only 1 million people in the whole state. But I think that all of us live in kind of that group of 1 million people where it's enough of a community where we can pay attention to this domain and hold our elected officials accountable. And maybe that's just your school board, maybe it's your city elections, maybe it's your statewide elections. But what happened was, citizens were just inspired to pay attention, to follow the money, to see where this influence was coming from.
And do you feel like in more rural communities that there's just more of an ability for this money to have kind of an impact and versus somewhere like New York City? I mean, there's dark money everywhere, but in New York City, someone can go to their really rich donors and raise money through them versus needing the help of dark money. I guess no one ever solicits it explicitly, but I'm just trying to get at maybe places that are more susceptible to being affected by it.
I think it kind of works both ways. I think that if you're in more rural communities like Montana, I think that dark money can have a much bigger impact. Mm-hmm. I mean, you and I could pass a hat and probably buy up the airwaves in Montana. It's a cheap date is the phrase that everybody always uses. And so maybe we'll do that afterwards. But so you can have an outsized impact and you can really influence the politics in an entire state, controlling a lot of natural resources, right? But it works both ways, because the flip side of that is that you can really, if you're a citizen in a rural community, I think you're probably more in touch with your elected officials in a way. You run into them in the grocery store and you know their names and you're paying attention to their policies, and you're probably holding them accountable to smaller violations in the same way. So yeah, it works both ways.
So I want to switch gears just a little bit. Something else that really stood out to me was the significant role that local journalism played in, any of this even coming out into the open. So could you just kind of reflect on the connection between local journalism and holding our government officials accountable in the ways that, a Politico or an MSNBC would not?
Yeah, I mean, local journalists are the ones who can really plug you into your local government. And there's, without that, we're not going to get that from these national outlets. I originally met John Adams because I was following his local reporting, and there was a pretty strong tradition. There were a number of different reporters who were doing that in Montana. To be honest, as a filmmaker, initially I thought he was just going to be this narrative device. I thought he was going to be this lens through which we were going to see this story. And that's how he was functioning in large part. But as we were digging through this mystery story, when he lost his job, it's sometimes as a documentary filmmaker, terrible things happen, but you're like, oh, that's really good for the film. And it was kind of good for the film only because John, at that point when he lost his job, was becoming emblematic for what journalism was going through, for what newspaper industry and the financial pressures and the consolidation that they were going through. Like, John was living that out. And I knew that we would have not only this storyline about dark money and follow the money and figure out where this potential corruption is coming from, but also a journalist following that stuff, which when you pull him out of the equation, you really realize as a viewer how important it is to have people like him on the job. So yeah, John became a much bigger part of the story at that point, because I knew we had to show through him the importance of a watchdog press to keep an eye on this money in politics. One of the things that y'all can do is so John is covering Montana. There are a lot of other organizations like Montana Free Press that are doing what he does. There's a kind of umbrella organization for a lot of those news nonprofits that's called inn.org, if y'all are interested in looking at it, Institute for Nonprofit News. We have a website where we list a lot of this stuff to darkmoneyfilm.com. But going to inn.org will give you a way to plug into, local journalists who are bootstrapping things and aren't subject to the same potential, financial pressures that a lot of industrial newspapers are.
And I just have a couple more questions for Kimberly, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. So right now, a lot of political ads are shifting to social media. And, the 2016 election really showcased the influence that social media or political ads on social media can have. Facebook knows everything about everyone who uses it. And so when people are looking to advertise, they can create very targeted ads and know exactly what will set someone off or get them to buy something or maybe not vote. So could you talk about just as we transition into more digital advertising, what that will look like for dark money? Does it empower it? Does it weaken it? Does it provide a more direct line for even darker sources to start to influence our politics?
Yeah, this is the really scary part for me, because what we were following in Montana was an analog version that had a paper trail, and we can dig through. We can find boxes of evidence in a meth house in Colorado from a stolen car and use that as a paper trail. We also had a paper trail. It was like 14,000 pages of emails that came from those former National Right to Work employees. That was a very good and somewhat analog version of evidence that we could follow. It gets pretty scary when I imagine that same operation being run digitally in this really ephemeral nature that happens on Facebook. And even though the regulatory capacity and just kind of influence that they had at the Commissioner of Political Practices in Montana and other organizations like that in different states, even though they're better regulating that at the state level than they are at the FEC, that Commissioner of Political Practices isn't set up to track Facebook ads in an election. And I kind of shudder to think what the impact of that election cycle would have been if we didn't have this paper trail to follow. We were able to connect a lot of dots and show people how this dark money network works, but it would have been really tough to do. So, yeah, paying attention even more closely is what I think the bottom line for a lot of what people in the audience can do after seeing this film is to just step up media literacy, whether it's the analog version, whether it's postcards in your mailbox, whether it's ads on your Facebook feed. There's actually a number of different tools that you can use that ProPublica is a great nonprofit news organization that John's thing is, Montana Free Press is actually modeled after. And they have a tool that allows you to basically share your Facebook feed with ProPublica so that they can monitor the Facebook ads that you're getting. So we're going to have some repository. Facebook is doing a little bit of work to track these ads and to hold on to them. I think it's mostly a PR effort. I don't know how much they're gonna really be successful. But yeah, this is where if you guys need something bracing on your way out the door, this is where, as Ann Ravel says, things are going. Things are moving online. Things are becoming digital.
So my last question, kind of building off of that, is where does the responsibility fall? You have big actors like Facebook who could do a lot more. You have voters who probably could be a lot more informed on what's going on. And you have corporations who are pushing money in different ways. So, who needs to be better? Who needs to take on more responsibility to just have a more knowledgeable voting base?
I really think it's all about pressure on elected officials, the people who are charged with reforming this system that just got them elected. It's tough, but it can be done, and I've seen it happen. We saw it happen in Montana. We see it happening at the federal level when people are really held to task. And that happens when voters are demanding that they see where the money is coming from. A lot of people don't realize that even within the Citizens United decision, there's an accompanying decision that says by 8-1 majority that all of what we're saying in Citizens United is predicated on the fact that we're going to have disclosure. Disclosure is paramount. There's even like these people rhapsodizing about like, well, they have this thing called the internet now. And we're going to be able to know where all the money comes from immediately. And so we don't have to worry about all this unlimited money or corporate speech. It's like people are going to know where it's coming from. That's not happening. So what everybody in this audience can do is make sure that your elected officials are exposing where all of their money is coming from, and even moreover, taking steps to reform that system. So there's a big movement that's being kind of comprised right now that is planning to, there's over 100 organizations pushing for a big democracy reform wave of legislation in January. The assumption is that the House will, the U.S. House will be constructed slightly differently than it is right now. But the first order of business is campaign finance reform as part of this package of democracy reform. And the first order of business within that is establishing this system that I was talking about with small donor matching funds, 6-1, just like New York City does it. So making damn well sure that your elected officials know that you as a constituency want for them to be voting for this democracy reform, and that campaign finance reform is the most important part of that, is an easy way to point at that. And again, we have a website with darkmoneyfilm.com. There's a page called Get Involved that lists a bunch of the different organizations that you can plug into if you want to take further steps when you walk out the door.
Great. So if anyone has questions, they can raise their hand and the ushers will bring a microphone to you.
Thank you. Hi. First, I want to say thank you so much. That was incredible.
Thank you.
I dare say entertaining and incredibly informative and so important. Thank you.
Thank you.
You both for being here. I was hoping you could get into the differences between super PACs and 501c4s in detail, because one of the things that I consider myself really well informed, but I am realizing how part of the problem is that we're just so inundated with information that words don't get defined. And it feels like a super PAC is a problem too. So can you pull that apart a little bit for us?
Yeah, I'm gonna define it, and then I'm gonna kind of scuttle the definition. Don't be bummed out. So Citizens United is actually in conjunction with another lower court decision in the DC Circuit called Speech Now. That is what created super PACs. Super PACs can give unlimited money, but they have to show they're like a PAC in that they have to play by campaign finance rules and disclose who their donors are. But they're a super PAC because they can give unlimited money. Now, the exchange for that, the thing that makes them super, is they can only make independent expenditures, and they can only spend money independent of a candidate. So if I'm a PAC, I can give her money all day long and talk to her all day long. If I'm a super PAC, I can spend unlimited money, but it has to be an independent of her campaign, so we can't coordinate, we can't discuss things with each other. Citizens United also, it did not create 501c4 groups or the political use of 501c4 groups, but it enabled them. I mean, there were actually some folks who were in Montana test driving 501c4 groups for political purposes in 2008 and 2010 before Citizens United passed. But if you can't spend unlimited money, it's small potatoes. You know, you hide a little bit of money, but it doesn't really help that much. So that's the main difference with but with 501c4 groups, you don't have to disclose who your donors are, right? So for most of the time since Citizens United has been passed, you had super PACs, you spent a bunch of money, but you got to show where the money's coming from. And then you got 501c4 groups that people used to hide the money, right? Those are the two main vehicles. This is where I scuttle things. Because right now what's really happening is if you start up a campaign, you just start up a super PAC. If she's going to run a campaign, we're going to start a candidate committee for her campaign. And then we'll also, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, talk to some people who used to work for her, and they'll start up a super PAC. And then what all the political consultants do these days is wink, wink, nudge, nudge, start up a C4 group over there, which is run by some other friends of hers who used to work for her. So now what is de rigueur is for people to take lots of money into the super PAC. If you have a big donor that wants to hide their influence, you give it to the C4. That anonymizes it. It launders the money. It's now anonymous. And then that C4 group gives it to the super PAC. So the IRS goes to the super PAC and says, where'd that money come from? And you have to tell us. You're a super PAC. You have to disclose your donors. And the super PAC says, well, it came from that 501c4 group, and I don't have to tell you who gave you that money. So it's this way of kind of laundering the money. Did that answer your question? I'm sorry, it's such a drag.
I have a mic over here. And I just wanted to know whether when John Adams lost his job and they shut that bureau down, was that politically influenced? Was it just a financial decision? It felt, what you implied that it was merely financial, but it felt in the film like, we're going to get rid of this.
I think it was just financial. John says it's financial. Yeah, and I believe that. And John really doesn't have any hard feelings towards the people at his paper. He felt like the whole, the architectural changes that were happening to all of the different Gannett properties where they basically laid everybody off and asked people to reapply for their jobs. That was something that happened nationwide. So, yeah, I don't think he was targeted individually. Let me give you some more updates on John. I don't know what the situation is with his facial hair because I never do. Who knows? It's actually interesting because there's we held some test screenings for people, just to see how the film was playing, if we had to fix anything. And we got a bunch of notes back. They would say, we really like those two journalists that you have in the film. The guy with the beard and the guy without the beard. They seem to cooperate very well with each other. But then in the editing room, there was this another light bulb moment where I realized, whoa, everybody recognizes the dog, but they don't recognize him. So if you cut to the dog first and then to John, he's just the dude with the dog. And it really helped that. And he has a lower third on him every single time. So no, but he's doing good. He just 2 days ago hired his first employee. So he's ramping up, getting bigger. Yeah. And he's doing all right. Sorry. Sorry. I'll get you next.
Thank you very much. It's really an amazing film, and I can tell how much work and research went into it. It's really an incredible representation of what's going on today. There are numerous references to the Koch brothers, whom I think a lot of us have heard about. But in terms of the other corporations and or individuals, you refer to them as organizations, but really it seems it's corporations. Who are some of the others that you or others have been able to ascertain through the research you've done?
Yeah, and a lot of times, like, so 501c4 organizations can be corporations. Like those are, those can be used interchangeably sometimes. Some of the other big one, I mean, I'll just tell you, Tester's race, Richard Uline from Wisconsin is spending big in his race and a couple of others. Sheldon Adelson is, and notice that I'm talking about like a lot of times the conversation starts out with corporations or organizations or unions or trade organizations like the Chamber of Commerce, but most of it really boils down to these ridiculously wealthy individuals who are, giving money through these 501c4 organizations. So yeah, Americans for Prosperity was kind of invented the game in a lot of ways. One of Americans for Prosperity is they are the main funders. They're not the only funders, but they're the main funders. Koch Brothers, the Koch Brothers are the main funders for Americans for Prosperity. That's changing, shifting. It'll take us a while to really have it settled down, but that was the case in 16 and 14 and 12. So yes, Richard Uline, Sheldon Adelson. A lot of people ask about folks like Tom Steyer. Tom Steyer, I think you have to distinguish because, like, we know where his money is coming from. It's not like he's not funneling it through 501c4 groups. There's a little bit that has gone into, I think, Demand Justice is the name of C4. But yeah, so the answer to a lot of these questions is like, if he's standing there and saying, I'm Tom Steyer and this is what I believe, then you can probably assume that it's not being funneled through a C4 in the way that some of the other money is.
What plans are there for wider dissemination of your film?
Thank you. I always forget to answer that. So we opened in theaters in July, and we had a great theatrical run. We broadcast on PBS Strand on October 1st. And actually just yesterday we rolled out on Amazon, so everybody can see us on Amazon. We're gonna, the only subsequent step that we're taking is to do an international release on Amazon to get future territories. It's actually, I'm a little bit surprised, frankly, to see that there's as much interest as there is internationally, but we're certainly running into that. And right now we're doing an awards campaign and got our fingers crossed, got a couple of great nominations, and that's our plan for the next couple months. There's a bunch of info at darkmoneyfilm.com. There's all the future screenings and how you can see the film and educational distribution and stuff like that.
How close did you get to the investigation of the magic boxes in the meth house? That is a remarkable paper trail. Can you expand on that?
By how close did I get? You mean?
What happened there?
I'm still trying to figure it out. The car was stolen.
It wasn't a setup, it was stolen.
I don't know. I mean, that's the big question: is whether somebody was notified of, like, hey, you guys, I'm going to be having coffee in this place, and there's a car out there that's full of
boxes
documents
in it.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, that's what a lot of people are wondering. But the fact is that the indisputable facts is that Sarah Arnold was driving the car, that she parked and actually met Allie LaFleur. For those of you who paid really close attention, you can watch it again. and that while they were meeting, the car was stolen, reported to the police. Car was recovered a couple days later, but the boxes were missing. A couple months after that, they end up in this meth house, drug house thing. Somebody realized that they had something to do with political stuff, gave them to a Colorado state legislator, Democrat, who recognized that they were important and sent them to the Commissioner of Political Practices in Montana. Yeah, so that's where that paper trail came from. And that cracked the door open to the initial investigations, but the real trove, the thing that really sealed the deal, was those 14,000 pages of emails from former National Right to Work employees. That's what really allowed them to piece the case together. And all of that, I think, would have been for naught if they didn't have Sarah Arnold as a whistleblower who offered to testify and come up from Colorado and do it. I think she's really heroic. People ask about Sarah Arnold. She predicted that she would be blacklisted, and she was. She didn't have another political client again. She was a political consultant for campaigns. She didn't have another client after she testified at the trial. So she went back to school, and she's a data analyst now. But I think making what she did even more heroic.
I just, because I'm here and it's easy, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
I thought, contrary to what you said at the beginning, that you achieved a wonderful visual thing. I have never been anywhere near Montana, and it's completely, you made me fall in love with the state. I mean, I don't know if you, it was wonderful. And the wonderful thing about the opening with the geese, I mean, you did a peculiar thing. You made the political story positive, and you ended with the geese dying. And that was a really complicated, it sort of sobered me up. I thought, well, okay, maybe the politics are getting better, but the birds just died. And that was wonderful. And that's completely visual. You did a beautiful thing, the whole landscape of the state. Thank you. Just beautiful.
Thank you very much. Yeah, those, you really, when people die, when geese die, animals die, you really feel the long-term implications of that. And I think it's a very sobering reminder that mistakes made a century ago, maybe ones that we're living with still.
That was a great film. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
What is your prediction or your analysis of the outcome of this election coming up? And lastly, you're going to be doing more filmmaking in terms of politics or showbiz? Thank you.
I may bounce that to you. So y'all need to know, like, if you're not, I was so excited that somebody from Crooked Media was going to be here doing this tonight. I love all of their podcasts, but they also have a really good resource called Vote Save America that I personally love. That is like, if y'all need to get ballot information from all over the U.S., all the federal races, right? You should talk more about that. I don't know. You talk more about the predictions for Tuesday. I don't know. That's a big question, sir.
No one can predict anything. I think there will be good things that happen on Tuesday. I mean, I think after 2016, no one wants to predict anything. I do think we'll flip the House. I think California will play a huge role in whether or not that happens with the 7 districts here that are represented by Republicans, but Hillary Clinton won. But California has the most, but you have Pennsylvania, Virginia, Minnesota, and one other state that I'm forgetting that all have at least 4 competitive seats that if they can be flipped, add up to over 30 seats, and we only need to flip 23 to take over the House. I think we should not worry about the Senate. It'd be really cool and nice if we flip the Senate, but I think that's a little out of reach, and it would just be icing on the cake. I think we'll have a few really positive outcomes in some governor's races. In Kansas, that was supposed to be a red seat, and then Chris Kobach won, and it became a toss-up. And so I think there's a lot of people out there who probably didn't like him already as Secretary of State, but then he took on a more national profile with the president's voter fraud commission, and I think he probably got a few more people who didn't like him because of that. But I think there are going to be some losses we don't expect, but I think there are going to be a lot of wins that we do expect and some that we don't. I think the biggest thing is I just don't want people to, if they don't see a blue wave, to be discouraged, to still remain engaged in the elections that we have coming up, because the thing about politics after doing this for so long is you can't just look at one election. This is a long game, and for 2018 and 2020, redistricting counts on that, and that will determine if we get to restore our map to, well, Democrats are guilty of gerrymandering as well, but not to the extent that we see now. But I think that if we can just focus on 2018 and 2020, we can at least have legislatures in place that will try to restore some type of parity into our electoral process. And Vote Save America, it's something I'm really excited about. Pretty much you can go, we have an interactive map, you can go to whatever state you live in, if you want to pass this along to other folks, but you can see all the information you need to know about voting in your state. You can also go to our ballot guide, you type in your address, it'll pull up your ballot. You can learn about the candidates that are on your ballots. For the competitive races that we're following, we added a little extra blurb of information in there for you to just know more about the candidates, because the tool that we use, they pull the information about the candidates from their website, and everyone paints a very rosy picture of themselves on the websites, on their own websites. But we also included the statewide ballot measures, so you can go in there and read about those in basic terms, not the confusing terms that you find on your ballot. You can save that information to your phone or print it out and take it into the voting booth with you, so you have all of that research right there. And you can also find campaigns to volunteer on. So it's been amazing. We've had over 15 volunteer shifts signed up for Democratic candidates throughout the, Oh yeah, what did I say? 15. Oh, sorry, 15,000 volunteer shifts. We ran a fundraising campaign about a week ago, and we raised over $1 million in less than a week for really competitive races around the country in cheap media markets, so that those dollars can go as far as possible. Our Facebook group and our hashtag, there are so many people excited about the election. So even though the polls keep going back and forth, just seeing that energy has gotten me excited. But you were supposed to be answering a question about your future filmmaking.
Yeah, I'm looking at a couple different ones. A very important issue to me is information disinformation. I mean, it's in a lot of ways what got us to where we are, I think, in 2016. It's somewhat related to dark money and the way that social media was manipulated to move voters. So I'm looking at that issue. And kind of. I'm not sure what the next one is going to be, so thanks for asking. But I love documentary filmmaking. I actually want to say thank you to Miriam Cutler, our beautiful composer. Where is she? She's way in the back. There's Miriam. Was the composer for the film, and one of the earliest and oftenest supporters of the film. When I told her I had this crazy idea to do a movie about campaign finance reform, there were many years when Miriam was the one who got it and kept supporting and feeding me music the whole way through. So thank you. But yeah, it's we'll see what the next projects are.
Are there any other questions? Can take one more, if so.
Hi, great film. There was a little bit about this in the film, but not a lot. Montana elects its judges, right, and its Supreme Court. So, to what degree is dark money influenced, especially the Supreme Court elections?
You're talking about U.S. Supreme Court or state Supreme Court? Yeah, I mean, there's a whole episode that's on the cutting room floor of this film. Let me tell you two quick examples. Cutting room floor of this film, sitting state senator in leadership has his own dark money group. So, like, imagine if Mitch McConnell or, Nancy Pelosi had a dark money group and they used that to intimidate people in their own party. You better vote this way or I'm going to attack you with my dark money group. That dark money group played in a state Supreme Court election in Montana and got a seat. So yes, it happens. I think that when you take a look at the role of dark money in judicial elections, it's particularly scary because how do we as voters get somebody to recuse themselves on a case when we don't know who they should be recusing themselves from, right? The cement plant gets the judge elected and there's a cement case going in front of the Supreme Court. How are we to know what that influence is? That's particularly scary. You didn't ask about the U.S. Supreme Court, but dark money was actually really, really influential with there was a group that sprang up called Judicial Crisis Network. They opposed Merrick Garland, spent millions of dollars to get Gorsuch nominated, then turned around and spent millions of dollars again to get Kavanaugh nominated. Again, whose money is that? I don't know. What if a case from whoever the big donors were that were supplying that money goes in front of Kavanaugh or Gorsuch? That's a big problem. I would also add that a left-wing dark money group sprang up to oppose Kavanaugh, and I just got to say it's a really bad idea to get involved in this escalating arms race of dark money, especially when it comes to judicial elections.
Okay. Thank you all so much. And if we just give Kimberly one more round of applause.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you
Thanks
for
to the
coming.
Hammer.
Yes, thank you.